Hello and welcome to the Homeschool with Moxie podcast. I'm your host, Abby Banks, and this is episode 328. You know, bonding between grandparents and grandchildren is a huge blessing, but it doesn't always happen on its own. And as parents, and especially homeschool parents, we have a unique opportunity to guide our kids into valuing and connecting with the older generation. And we're not just talking about grandparents. This could be the older generation in your church or in your community. And so today on the podcast, I'm very excited to be welcoming Isabel Tom. She's the author of The Value of Wrinkles, a young perspective on how loving the old will change your life. And she's created the Grandkid Investigator Kit, which she will also explain to us. It's a really great idea. Isabel is a mom of 3 with years of experience working in senior living and hospice care, and she's passionate about helping parents equip their children to build meaningful intergenerational relationships. So you can find the show notes, of course, at 41more.com/328. I will link to that below the video. And enjoy this conversation I had with Isabel Tom about helping kids value and connect with grandparents. Hey, Isabel, I'm so glad you're here today. Welcome to the Homeschool with Moxie podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Abby. I'm so glad to be here.
This is a super great topic, and we're going to jump in. We've not covered this on the podcast, but hey, this is perfect for homeschool families, for parents of any, of any kind of education background. But before we jump into, connecting with the older generation, tell us a little bit about yourself. Why is this such a passionate topic for you personally?
Yeah, so this is kind of like the story of my life. I grew up in a multi-generational household, but I like to tell people that yes, I loved my grandparents, but I didn't always appreciate it, and I didn't necessarily think it was that great of a thing to be living with my grandparents. But I ended up living with my grandparents for the first 26 years of my life and ended up walking with them to the end of their lives until they were 98 and 102. So they lived a long time. And so one of the nice things about that is I became an adult and I grew and I matured and I learned. And looking back, I was able to see how much I really appreciated the opportunity to be able to live with them. I think it was character development. I think it just taught me many things without actually having somebody lecture something to me. And along with that, a huge part of my story is that after graduating from college, I ended up with my first job out of college in a retirement community. And I just jumped right in, ended up realizing that, God had put on my heart this passion for the older generation. And part of it was that as I was going to work, I was learning and then learning how to care for my own loved ones as well. So that's a huge part of my story. And it's something that I realized I don't want to keep to myself. I want to be able to teach, especially parents, to teach their kids and to give them this opportunity. So that's kind of where it started.
That's so unique. And the fact that your grandparents were alive for so long, like
Yeah.
that's a gift, like that so many people don't have that time with grandparents. That's amazing. So tell us, why is this worth focusing on? Why is connecting with the older generation? And I'm guessing grandparents are great too, but I'm guessing this can extend into the
hmm
community, into your church family, like all of those older generations, even if they're not related to you. But why is this something worth focusing on?
Well, I think obviously, I could talk about this for hours, but I would say from a parent's point of view, I think it's one of the best ways to teach our kids how to interact with people who are very different from us. And, throughout their lives, they're going to be meeting people of all kinds. And if we are trying to prepare them for the workplace one day, they're going to meet people very different from them. And I think older adults pretty much they meet that criteria of being very different from our kids. I think it's also a great way for our kids to learn social skills and to learn about the past, just to appreciate the things that we have now. And the beauty of this is that I don't think we have to take our kids to a third world country or even bring them to a homeless shelter to teach them these things. This is something that they can experience within their own family as long as we as parents are intentional about it.
And I love how you're kind of taking the perspective of like, don't wait for the older generation to come seek you out. You're kind of like, let's be proactive here and get us and our kids to be able to interact with them. But there are so many challenges because like kids can be shy or they can feel like this is so hard. Like, how do you overcome some of those challenges when you're trying to help connect the generations?
So I experienced this just last week. So I ran a Grandkid Investigator program where I connected kids, mostly who are kids who are homeschooled, with residents at an assisted living community. And school hadn't started yet. My kids actually go to public school. And so I decided I'm going to take my kids with me. And they have come with me to quite a bit of these things. And they were not very happy to come. And this is what I had to remember and what I remind parents. Just because they don't like it doesn't mean it's not good for them. And so the way that I think of intergenerational relationships, whether it is with grandparents or others, is that this is just like eating vegetables or teaching your kids math or having them practice piano. This is something that's good for them and they might not always appreciate it. So I had to remind myself that, and I pushed through, and it was it was so wonderful because I got them to go. And yeah, it took a couple of like, here, I'll give you a lollipop, or a little bribing sometimes. But especially my teenage daughter, I asked her, how was it, at the end of the day? And she said, it was great. I met this lady and she told me about this and that. And she told me that all her siblings have passed away, and just went on and on. And it reminded me, no, this is worth it. This is exactly where I want my kids to be.
I think that's so important. And I consider myself an older mom now that some of my kids are in college and getting
Yeah.
married and stuff. I'm like, okay, I'm kind of at this point where I can turn around to the younger moms and say, yeah, it's actually good to have your kids do hard things. I think sometimes parents shy away from that. What you just said, like if something's hard, the kids don't want to do it, we kind of go, okay, and we kind of go along with it. But you are so right. All those things you mentioned, things that are hard in life, they're still worth doing. And we have to teach our kids kind of like to push through the uncomfortable or difficult situations. Yes, I love that. I love that message because that is so important. I love that. So great.
Can I
Now,
add something in?
yes, please.
Well, I was going to say one of the things that I found is kids, especially these days with technology, their social skills are not
Mm,
great. And so I really believe that older adults are some of the most gracious people. This is like one of the best spaces for our kids to learn how to interact with others. And so I feel like when I have brought kids into this situation, even had my daughter, I invited my daughter's friend to come with
mm,
us, teenage girl, and I see them stretch themselves. In the
mm,
beginning, there is resistance. They stretch themselves. And
mm,
I see that they are proud of themselves because they have grown in
mm.
learning how to do something different. So, I mean, I think it's something worth pushing through.
Absolutely. And think of the confidence that gives your kids for more
Hmm.
new situations that they find themselves in that are also difficult. It just is helpful
Exactly.
for everyone. Now, there are going to be kids, though, that are not just like your typical teenager that doesn't want to do something. What about the kids who might have autism or neurodivergent or ADHD? Like, is there a
Yes.
different kind of advice you would give those parents?
Well, I think, we also had neurodivergent kids who were part of our program last week, and I have neurodivergent kids. And what I say is, just being there, just being around an older adult, and this was in an assisted living setting. My own kids, they were a little resistant at first, and I said, you can play a game of cards here, because you know what? You just being here you're going to be a blessing. And sometimes it
Mhm.
does take time to just kind of get familiar with a place, and that is totally understandable. And so I think we need to recognize that we can't expect to throw our kids in the same room as another older person or their grandparent and expect it to be this wonderful conversation, and to think that they even know what they're doing. So I would say, one, just to remember that just being there matters, and that kids have this superpower that they can say hello, and it literally will bring an older person, a stranger, it will leave them just so happy that somebody acknowledged them. So I usually teach kids and teens, I say, just say hello in their name, and they will be so happy. And then the other thing I would say for parents is just to remember to guide them. So, if a child has autism, then it's really important to prompt them. So I would say, Mr. Smith, ask Mr. Smith, how is his day? And you give them the words to say. And when you do that, you give them practice, but you also allow them to learn, what to do in this situation.
Mm-hmm. So can you give us some like practical tips and tricks and advice, and like how does this play out? How can we as parents help our children connect with the older generation? Like what does this look like? Can you give us some more, I don't know, like deep
Some
dive
more
into
meat.
like what this looks like? Yeah.
Sure. So, I think the first thing is to remember that a lot of older adults in this society, they are often unseen. And so just the fact that you see, I talk to my kids a lot, so it's not just the interaction that they have with an older person, but what we say and the amount that we, if we talk about a certain topic, then they start to think about it more. And so I will talk to my kids, or I'll talk to other kids and tell them, a lot of times they're unseen in this world, because in this world, people value those who are fast, who are working, who are contributing. And when somebody gets older, usually it's harder for them to do that. And so I first teach just the fact of acknowledging. And then I like to say, when you ask them, you honor them. So anytime you ask an older person a question, what you're doing is you're acknowledging that they're there, but you're honoring them because you want to hear their voice. And one of the frustrations I've heard from a lot of grandparents, and mostly grandparents, is that their grandkids don't care, and they're not even paying attention, and they want to share their story, but nobody's paying attention to them. So just by asking questions, you can do a lot. So I try to have these like broad principles, because there are really so many different ways that you can be practical about this. And I'm babbling here, but another thing I think to think about is the five love languages, and just to remember the fact that kids have different ways of loving others, right? And so, yes, it may seem like the girl who can chat a lot with an older person is the one who is good at doing this, but to remember that, they can just give a picture with their name on it to somebody or to their grandparent. I have one child who's definitely more shy than his siblings, and sometimes it's passing the phone over and saying, you can type emojis to your grandma right now. So I think we have to be very creative and just remember that people, not only is the older person that we're reaching out to different, but our kids are different. And so it does take time to develop a relationship.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, so does this look like seeking out, like you're saying, you show up at like the assisted living home or whatever, where they are all, where your community has the older generation? Is that what you're suggesting? Like people need to do this every week, or is there a more organic way to do it? Like how, like, so if parents are sitting here with homeschool kids and we've got a bunch of kids at home, how do you kind of see this playing out? Is it something that's regular? Is it something that they should do with people not related to them? Should they start with their own relatives first? What does that look like?
Well, I mean, everybody has a different situation. And to be realistic, some people have very difficult situations. Some parents have very difficult situations with their own parents. And so I do not want to give out advice based on every single situation out there, but I would say that when it comes to family, they're usually the best place to start.
Mhm.
Because why? Because your kids already have a relationship with them. Maybe it's not a very close relationship. Maybe you live far away, and so your kids don't see their grandparents often, but they already have an understanding of who they are versus going to an assisted living, going to a senior care community, and just making a friend there.
Mhm.
So I usually say start with the family, start with your own grandparents, start with your neighborhood, even if it's just saying hello to this person and giving them a card and having your kids sign the card and just write their name on it, right? It's like exposure therapy. You are slowly um, showing your kids through example, right, what it's like to interact with an older person. And so I think probably the easiest way to start is to serve as example. first to model it. And so some parents may say, well, it doesn't seem like I'm doing very much then. I'm just being kind to my mom and visiting her. Well, that actually, it does a lot. And my example there is, my parents never told me that I needed to honor my grandparents. They never sat me down and told me a lesson, but I saw my own parents care for their aging, for my grandparents. And so because of that, just seeing it, I naturally, that's the way that I kind of led my life, even into young adulthood. So, when my grandma was in the end of her life at the nursing home, I went to go visit her. I would help her. I was willing to serve her because I had seen that done before.
Mhm. So what about families who live far away from their grandparents? What advice would you give to stay connected? I know it's easier than it ever has been, so we kind of have no
Yeah.
excuse, right? But do you have some ideas there?
Well, I do think it can be hard if you don't have guidance, right? So
Mhm.
I have definitely seen kids and grandparents and heard about how they look at each other on FaceTime and it's not very much conversation. And so I actually developed a tool called the Grandkid Investigator Kit, really to help kids to connect with their older loved ones. And what it does is it prompts kids and it makes it fun for them to investigate and learn about their grandparents. So I have different missions like Operation Marshmallow. And, for my kids, I assigned them a mission and said, okay, every week you're going to do 2 missions or you're going to do 1 mission. And when you finish that mission, you can either, some kids are going to just be excited to check it off the box. I have a mission plan that they can just check complete, or you may want to do a point system or give a prize. But I had my kids do that, and what it ended up doing is it gave them a topic to talk about with their grandma that was kind of unrelated to anything else they would have talked about, but it gave them words that they needed to say. And each week they would talk about a different thing. Their grandmother loved it, got to talk about everything from the fact that she doesn't really like to eat certain foods, like she is picky. Or we've had some grandkids find out, oh, my grandma used to play with spiders when she was little. Those are the things she actually was pretty cool. It allows those fun conversations to come out. And in the end, what it does is your kids learn to know their grandparents versus just, knowing that they give birthday gifts and maybe they babysit them. It allows them to know them as a person so that they can start to ask more questions and become more curious. So that's a tool that I created. But, just asking questions. If you need guidance, you could use a tool like that. But, I think we have to guide our kids to be able to have those conversations to make it more exciting.
Mhm. So talk more about the Grandkid Investigator Kit. So if people want this kind of help, what will they get in that kit? What do they get and how does it work?
Sure. So it comes with it. It is a digital kit that I have, and that has actually been used by a number of homeschool families. But each there's a mission plan, and then there are 12 missions, and each of the missions, like I said, have to do with different topics. So there's Operation IT, where they're asking questions about uh, technology and maybe learning about what their grandparents used back then and then comparing it to what they use now. I have something called Operation Time Travel, which is like a Mad Libs. I know a lot of families are familiar with Mad Libs, but what it does is the child will do the silly story first and they'll make up a funny story. And then the second part is learning about the real story. And so there are questions that prompt the kid to learn about, did you have to share a room when you were younger? How many floors were in your house? And so it kind of gets them to learn about their grandparents' childhood, their childhood days. And so there are all different types of missions. Some of them are more sensory oriented. For example, Operation Jukebox has them listening to a playlist, and there's a playlist where they get to rate with their grandparent, whether they like this genre of music. But really, I'll tell you, like, behind the heart of this is really, it's actually a tool to help kids to find out more about their grandparents so that as they age, as their grandparents age, they can actually take part in the care because they know their grandparent. And having worked in senior care, good care is care that's personal, where you know the person, where you know what they want. And so this is really a tool to help kids to get to know their grandparents as people.
I think
Does
I
that answer your
also,
question?
yes, it does.
Okay.
I think I also saw people can try out a free mission, and we'll link to
Yes.
that in the show notes because that's a great
Yes.
way to just see what it's like and, what's involved. So I think that's great. I also realized, if moms or dads are like, hey, I want to learn more about this topic myself, you also wrote a book about this. Tell us
Yeah.
about your book.
So my book is called The Value of Wrinkles, a young perspective on how loving the old will change your life. And some people say it's like a guidebook for grandkids and for adult children as well. But it's really like I was sharing in the beginning, my story of how I went from grumbling to being grateful about my grandparents, but it also shares a lot of tips on caring for an older loved one. So part of my story is that when I worked in senior care, I worked in every level of care, starting in independent living. I did senior fitness, chair aerobics, to working all the way to hospice care. And I was a young adult when I started this journey. And the blessing is that when I look back after my grandparents had passed away, every job that I had actually matched the needs of my grandparent at that time. So when I was working in senior fitness, my grandpa walked an hour and 15 minutes every day, 6 days a week. And then when I was working in hospice, that was when my grandmother, my grandfather, and then actually my dad passed away. And so this was not just a job for me, all of these roles that God had given me. I realized that God had given me these roles so I could learn how to care
Mhm.
for my own loved ones better. And so that book really is not just a tool for adult children, but I would say also an encouragement to help them to see that the time that they have with their parents is actually very precious, and the fact that their parents are still with them
Mhm.
is that's a gift.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So, what at final advice as we wrap up here, what final advice would you give to homeschool families specifically that are listening to this that kind of want to get into this? Give us just a little more of a nudge of why we should do this, or even like some fears or, hesitation we have about like pursuing some of these ideas. Can you kind of speak to that and encourage us as we wrap up?
Well, I would say it is definitely worth trying. I would go and try out the free mission that I have. I think it's at valueofwrinkles.com/free mission. And the reason is because, especially if it's your older loved ones, like your own aging parents, they're only with us for a limited amount of time. And
Mhm.
so I understand that it is important to teach our kids many different things, but this is having a relationship and knowing about their own family history and knowing about their own loved ones is just a real gift. And it's also an opportunity where if you have a broken relationship with your loved one, um, grandkids, I say bless without baggage. And maybe we can't have a conversation or relate to our loved ones as easily, but when we connect them with their grandkids, that is almost giving them a second try, a second chance. And I think that's what, God calls us to love others. And it's not always easy, but I think it's definitely um, something that we need to do out of obedience to God and also as a way to honor Him.
This has been a great conversation, and we're going to put links in the show notes so everyone can find your resources and your book and your kit. So, Isabel, thank you for sharing this. This is a really great topic, and I see how passionate you are about it. So I appreciate your expertise here. But thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining me today for this conversation with Isabel. I hope you were encouraged and got some really great actionable strategies that you can put into practice right away. Remember to check out the show notes at 4onemore.com/328, and we will include links to everything we talked about in this episode with Isabel. Thanks for joining us today. And in the meantime, happy homeschooling.